Yvette Berry, welcome to Stateline. I think it's fair to say there's a very high level of public concern nationally at present about safety in childcare centres. Are the parents of the roughly 31,000 children in childcare here in the ACT entitled to assume that checks on workers in the sector are fail-safe?
Look, I think they can have confidence in early childhood centres in the ACT, and we have a number of different measures in place to make sure that our centres are providing the highest quality early childhood education and care service to our ACT community. I think one of the things that we need to do and focus on is make sure that we back in our early childhood educators. They're professionals, they've had training, and they have the expertise to care and educate for our children.
Are they suffering reputationally at present because of the obvious scandals that have erupted?
Absolutely.
Predominantly interstate, but also here?
Absolutely. It's a sector that's really struggling at the moment, and there was a bit of an exodus following COVID of the sector. People moving out of the sector, they were really under pressure to operate despite everybody else having their own children at home. They had to continue to work in services because children were too young to vaccinate, so they were turning up every day. Following that, it's been such a challenging sector to work in, low pay, high regulation, an incredibly complex work environment. And so, yes, we're seeing that there has been a bit of an exodus, and we've been trying to repair that. And then with these incidents that have occurred, it's putting a lot of pressure on the sector.
Let's talk about where we are now. Your federal colleague, Jason Clare, has outlined a legislative response which will be federal but national in implication. It includes a register of childcare workers nationally and an agreement to integrate the background checks. You support both of those?
Yeah, I absolutely do, and I was at the meeting when Minister Clare suggested those changes, combined with a range of other things.
Yeah.
The national law is an important part of addressing the issues in early childhood education, but we must support the professionalisation of that sector as well.
All right. A national system of background checks is only as strong as the weakest state, and I think it'd be fair to say at present that neither Victoria nor Queensland, to a lesser extent New South Wales, are looking particularly good. How do you ensure that when workers move to the ACT, you're not getting more false negatives when these systems get joined up?
Yeah, this is really important, and it's why in the ACT we had already started registering early childhood teachers, first of all to have to track where they were working, but also to support their professional development too. We can also include other educators in our registration so that they'll be registrable in the ACT, will know where they work and as they travel through systems. A national system will mean that we can see what's happening across the board, and so I think it's important to have that.
So you don't have any concerns about people whose background hadn't been adequately checked in another jurisdiction being cleared to come here and get the working with vulnerable people card?
We would still have our systems in place here. So we're changing our working with vulnerable people card to make sure that educators identify that they're working in an early childhood centre. That's currently not available, but we'll change that on our so that we'll be able to track them should something unfortunate occur.
Right.
But
so at present, on mobility within the ACT system, if a worker has been moved on because of a problem or an incident, do you have visibility on those movements of staff?
Not at the moment, only through the registration of teachers and early childhood teachers, which is why we need to make this change. But as I said, we'd already started phasing that in here in the ACT, so it's good that we'll have a national system. But also here in the ACT we start phasing in registration of educators as well to lift the profession as well with personal development, but also then we can see where they're working.
What do you understand of that pattern of behaviour? Has it been widespread, the moving on of what we might describe as a problem staff member?
Well, look, it could happen. I couldn't say that it doesn't happen. And we do see higher turnover in bigger for-profit services, and that does lead to a casualised workforce and not probably checking in on their previous work experience, but part of this work will mean that we can understand, that services can understand where people have been working previously, but part of it, importantly, is that professional development so that we can continue to lift the profession and support the sector. Otherwise, we won't have anybody to worry about.
Sure. A couple of quick checks on your attitude. You're on board with CCTV surveillance in various parts of the centres?
Well, I think we have to be careful with CCTV. CCTV will never replace a qualified early childhood professional when it comes to supervision, care and education of our young people. So we need to make sure that if there is CCTV used, that there's a very careful balance there. What we also need to address is the ratios within services, which the sector has been calling on for years, to make sure that we have the right number of qualified educators in the services, and then the CCTV would be a supplement to that.
Right, so it's a lower order priority for you in the ACT, is it?
Look, we've agreed with the federal government to investigate that, but from our perspective, it's about backing in the early childhood educators, supporting their development and professionalism, and making sure we have the right number of staff in a service to be able to do the work, and that is the supervision and the safe care and education of our children.
On compliance and investigation by the agency, are all parents, or at least affected parents, told all the time of any reportable incident at a centre that has been referred to the agency?
Look, no, not all the time, because they're usually allegations and not proven events. So,
but aren't they entitled to know about the existence even of an allegation?
Often in those cases, and it can be on different circumstances, that there'll be some complexity with that, and there might be an ongoing police investigation, and so the advice might be from the police that there is no conversation about what's happening in the service because it could impact on the investigation. I understand parents wanting to know what's going on in their services. I understand that. And we have to find a way to provide more information to parents about what's happening in a service and whether they've had reportable incidences in the past.
Right, because that's going to be the big grievance and perhaps the big change that ultimately comes from the horrible situation in Victoria, isn't it? This right to know principle.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do about it?
And that's one of the things that we want to address here in the ACT as well. You might know that New South Wales did a rapid review of their regulatory services in the early childhood education and care sector. So we've been looking very closely at the Wheeler review and what its recommendations are. One of the recommendations goes to providing information and data to parents, providing that at the front door of a service so that people can see the record of that service.
So you're flagging that you'll be, to use the cliche, forward-leaning on this. You actually think you can be more transparent, more open with
Yeah,
parents?
I think we can. And because there's been so many reviews and inquiries over the last few years, but also more recently, we can look to those on the recommendations they make, see if they can adapt well to the ACT's early childhood education and care sector, and then introduce those as a priority or over a period of time to phase the sector into that kind of change.
Okay. Now, what about the limited scope of matters that the agency can look at? That's been criticised publicly. I won't run through all of the examples given, but are the powers to penalise and investigate adequate, or is that also a work in progress?
That's part of the work that the national law will address because the regulator does two things. First of all, it regulates the service to make sure that it's complying with the National Quality Framework and the national law. The second part of its work is to make sure that it supports services to lift its quality framework so that it does meet the National Quality Framework requirements. So services have to complete a range of different processes to be either working towards meeting or exceeding as a measurement on the National Quality Framework, and the regulator plays that role as well, supporting services in what they can do to get towards meeting or exceeding, and they also have the regulator role.
And you'll soon have data out on that in the annual report, but you, I assume, have visibility on some of these performance indicators in between annual reports. What would you say about progress on those quality assurance standards?
Well, people will can see that online already. So that information is already available on where a centre might be sitting as far as the National Quality Framework is concerned. So that's already available. I think some of the other information that parents are wanting to see is whether the service has had incidences and what's happened as a result of those incidences. We think there's a way that we can provide information on that data that's helpful. But we also want to be careful that we're not demonising the sector, the profession, because without them, none of this work will matter. So we absolutely have to back them in.
I hear you making that point loud and clear, Yvette Berry. Much to be done. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Greg.